Welcome back to this ITIC ATM Virtual Summit. It's my great pleasure now to introduce the investment panel and the moderator, Samir Hashmi, Middle East correspondent, BBC World News. Samir.
Well, thank you, Rajan, for that. And a very good afternoon to everyone who's tuned in to watch this very interesting panel. We have had some really interesting discussions through the course of the summit. And now we're going to talk about one more very important element when it comes to the hospitality sector, especially in this post-COVID world, or COVID world rather, is still not out of it completely, is about investments. So the changes that have been brought in by the Middle East countries to encourage public-private investments initiatives in sustainable tourism. And I've got a very erudite panel with me that's going to throw light on this subject and give us an insight as to where are we right now and where are they headed as tourism boards and also spearheading their countries in terms of attracting tourists going ahead. So let me introduce, without any further delay, our panel for this discussion. His Excellency, Mr. Khalid Jasim Al-Midfa, who's the chairman of Sharjah Commerce and Tourism Development Authority. I'm sure he'll have a lot of insights to share with us. Thank you for joining us. Then we have Her Excellency, Dr. Ameenah Firdaus Gurib-Fakim, who's the former president of Mauritius. In fact, she was the first female president of that country. And she's also a biodiversity scientist. So not only does she understand how do popular destinations work, but also when it comes to sustainability. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. Then we have Mr. Hammad Al-Balawi, who's the General Manager of Investments for Ministry of Tourism in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, another country that's doing a lot right now in terms of attracting tourists. Thank you for joining us, sir. And last but not the least, Mr. Salvatore Lavallo, who's the head of Foreign Direct Investment in the Abu Dhabi Investment Office. So thank you so much. And I'm really looking forward to discussing with you about investments and what are all of you doing in terms of doing that, and also get some insights about sustainable tourism when you have to embed that in terms of attracting investment. So let me begin with Mr. Al-Midfa. You're heading the Sharjah Commerce and Tourism Authority. Now, can you give us a sense of what are investors really looking at? What are the key issues they consider when they are looking at potential tourism projects before they take a decision, and especially given in this context when we talk about COVID and also sustainability?
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much, Samir, and my colleagues, our fellow panelists, and the audience, and all the participants today. It is really important to have such webinars and to discuss really how the world is shaping up with these unprecedented situation that the world is facing. Now, with regards to your question, of course, investments is a major part that all the economies and all the countries are after. Now, there's been a lot happening in this part of the world, in the Middle East, in terms of investment, especially in the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia and some of the other neighboring countries. How did we deal with the investment, and how can we still attract and be an attractive country and city during these difficult times? What is the key? From our perspective, from my personal opinion, from what I've seen, I think the best thing that the government did during this, in terms of the economy, the benefit of the economy, was that we didn't stop investing. We did not stop investing. We believed that there is a brighter future, that there is hope, and the government did not stop investing. If we look at the projects that are still ongoing, the infrastructural projects and all the other tourism projects that didn't stop, maybe they were a little bit postponed due to the manpower, due to other reasons, but the government spending on infrastructure did not stop. And I think that was one of the main pillars of creating a sustainable sector and tourism sector and making it attractive. Of course, there are so many reasons. And I would like to highlight the main reasons, like my colleagues also know very well, the legislation. To have a proper legislation in your city, in your country, that can attract investors. And there is a very big list that we all maybe know some parts of it that we as the United Arab Emirates are offering to investors. And at the same time, the transparency, the dynamic business solutions that we have, the accessibility in terms of being a hub in this part of the world, connecting the East to the West. I think this is really important. And we believe that having these challenges only makes us stronger and will definitely result in a very strong rebound in terms of the economy and the boom that we will witness, inshallah, here in the United Arab Emirates and in our in the neighboring countries, inshallah.
Well, that's interesting. Some of the points you mentioned, especially about the fact that even during COVID, people like you and your departments were still investing, even though a lot of people had put that on hold. So that's interesting, and we'll discuss that as we progress in this discussion. But let me come now to Dr. Gurib-Fakim. Now, could you tell us that has COVID-19, has the pandemic really impacted sustainability as far as the tourism industry goes? Because you were the president of Mauritius, and you're also a biodiversity scientist. So I know you can juggle both the challenges as far as attracting people goes in terms of a destination and also keeping sustainability in mind. Do you think that has taken a hit or impacted in any way?
Well, thank you. Also, a big hello to all the fellow panelists. And I would like to thank the organizers for associating me with this very important event. Shamia, we have been in this sector for many years now. Since independence, tourism has been a key sector in our economy. And it started with the setting up of an airline, Air Mauritius, which has been, of course, a great service to the country. And we've had also visionaries who have capitalized on the existing resources. And over the years, we have kind of targeted the high end of the market. And gradually, it became so important that as we speak, the tourism sector has been accounting for over 23% of our GDP. Now, as you can imagine, with the lockdown for the past year, we have wiped off from our GDP 23% because they are, of course, associated the jobs and resources which are directly linked to the tourism sector. So we are already talking about a drop in the revenue from our country for about 24%. So I think as we are in the pandemic, we're still locked down because the airspace is still not open. We are confronted with two major issues. First of all, how to restart the tourism sector. And the second point is, do we provide the same offering? Because so far we have capitalized, as I said, the high end, we have sold a dream of sea, of sand and beaches. And as we open up, there are many issues because increasingly we are seeing epithet attached to the industry. We talk about green industry, green tourism, sustainable tourism. You name it. To me, there is only one word, and that's tourism. Period. Now, how do you wake up this industry from the slumbers of the COVID? But what value add do we put in it so that we have a much more resilient sector as we move on from the COVID, but more importantly, how do we make this sector, again, going back to our initial discussion, sustainable? How do we make it green? How do we make it, how do we touch on this fiber of the conscience of the consumer and all the providers in order to make it sustainable, in order to make it viable? And also, what new models do we bring? Because we can no longer keep on the same model. It has served a purpose, but we need to reinvent it. But how do we reinvent it? This is what we're going to be discussing. But there is no doubt, one thing I would like to put up front, while regulators, while government put in the appropriate infrastructure and investment, there is also one area we have to capitalize on, and that's the conscience of the consumer. What do they demand and what do they ask from the industry in order, side by side with the government and regulators, we make it sustainable?
Well, there's some interesting points you raised, especially about how to revive tourism, especially for a country that relies so heavily on tourism for revenues? And then how do you embed that with sustainability and make it a complete package? Now, these are some of the challenges which I think is confronting most destinations which rely on tourism. And that's where, let me get in Mr. Lavallo. What are some of the challenges which we discussed just now? How do you see cities or tourism destinations addressing that in this part of the world? Can they really, in this post-COVID world, bring back the tourists in huge numbers and at the same time also, achieve the sustainability targets?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that what we see is tourism is here to stay. It's 6% of the global economy. It will come back. People are not, even though there's a pandemic, there's no desire to stop traveling and to stop experiencing other parts of the world. And so we know that it will come back. The question is, how can we make it come back quickly and in a sustainable way, but also how do we want it to come back? And I think that this period has allowed us all to kind of take a pause on just executing and having opportunistic approaches, and really to think back on what is the strategic way that we want to be focused on tourism. Within Abu Dhabi, what we've really been looking at is what are the types of things that we want to be offering. A lot of people think about the UAE strictly with very high-end, city excursions. And what we're looking at is we have an incredible amount of biodiversity. We have beautiful deserts. We have beautiful coast in Abu Dhabi. Cities that people have often not even heard of, like Midfa and Gayafi, Delma Island, Sirbaniyaz Island. And these are places that a lot of people who've been in the UAE for a long time know about, but we would like others to explore it. So how can we, as we bring back the tourists, how can we enable them to really experience the country in a way that is maybe different than what was done before, but is more in line with some of the sustainability goals, also more in line with some of the types of tourism that we're looking at in terms of ecotourism, or in terms of more like culturally inclusive and culturally aware tourism. Because when we think about sustainability, we're not only thinking about in terms of ecological sustainability, but also cultural sustainability and heritage. And how can we tie all of these things into an experience that the tourists benefit from, but that the country then isn't just essentialized and used for, but really benefits as well. And I really do think that this, kind of year and a half of that pause has allowed us to think strategically, to think, what do we want to offer? How can we make sure that it's a great experience for the tourists, but also a long-term success for the country?
Now, I want to get in Mr. Balawi here. Now, Saudi Arabia is, I've just seen, just before 2019, in 2019, we saw Saudi Arabia, announcing these grand plans about pumping in money in tourism and making Saudi Arabia a really attractive destination for tourists. They have a huge strategy, but then came COVID, right? And that really, put those plans on hold, not only for Saudi Arabia, but every tourist destination in the world. So now for a country which is just starting out and looking at new avenues, and in this COVID world, as we keep talking about, and also looking at sustainability, keeping all those points in mind, what is Saudi Arabia looking at? What's the strategy right now? Are they looking at, investing in hotels and leisure venues privately, or the money will be spent by the government, or is it going to be a mix? Can you give us a sense of that strategy?
Thank you, Samir. And first and foremost, a very good afternoon to my fellow panelists, Your Excellencies, and a very warm welcome to our guests. Thank you for this opportunity. And indeed, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has outlaid over the course of the last few years very ambitious plans that would rightly demonstrate its potential for 2030 to achieve a strong and prominent position in the tourism industry. Let's not forget, Saudi Arabia is not new to tourism. We've been receiving guests in Mecca and Medina for 1,400 plus years. This is indeed many services within tourism. Today, what is indeed a very new chapter to us, which is extending that type of tourism services to other areas within recreation, leisure, and of course, many other industries in tourism. That comes with a very promising plan. It comes with a long-term vision. It comes with giga projects and public sector investment that will demonstrate our commitment to the tourism industry. And most recently, with the announcement of the new launch of the UN WTO office, headquartered in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia, representing the Middle East region, has demonstrated its commitment not just to the tourism industry in Saudi Arabia, but thought leadership, leading the way for tourism, from tourism, in a year where we led the G20 conversation, in a year where COVID hit hard. We have demonstrated our ability to really bring new ideas to the table that can be implemented across the world. Saudi Arabia is the 13th largest country. We are in many areas, in many destinations, a blank canvas. And linking it to the topic of sustainability, there are four main areas that we are kind of committing to. It is understanding the business risks that are linked to sustainability. Today, businesses are looking at new possible risks that face their business with the new pandemic and otherwise. There is, of course, the use of local resource and material. How can we integrate that within the projects we develop? There is the climate, and we all hear about the protection of the climate, and indeed the UNWTO definition of sustainability always talks about protection. We're taking it as a step forward and saying, what can we give back to the climate rather than how can we protect what already exists? And of course, communities. The G20 dossier, it uses the example and case study of Al-Ula, using the local communities, the local workforce for developing a tourism destination. And outlining maybe some other examples of commitment. 67 billion riyals will be pumped into the sector over the course of the next 8 to 10 years. Many of that private sector investment, over 800,000 room keys to be developed across destinations to meet the visitation numbers that we have targeted, 70% of that coming from the private sector. So indeed, Saudi Arabia has always been in tourism, has always led in tourism, is expanding its horizons into new areas. Indeed, Saudi Arabia has led the G20 conversation, has demonstrated its commitment through announcing the UNWTO commitment and headquarters in the kingdom, but has also demonstrated and will continue to demonstrate great developments across the board from both public and private sector.
Mr. Al-Midfa, let me get you in over there. Given that COVID-19 was a big challenge for the hospitality industry and the tourism industry. Now, what are destinations like yours doing in terms of attracting private investors? And what are really the key elements that investors are looking at, especially in this post-COVID world?
Thank you, Samir. I think, Samir, maybe I tapped onto one of the most important areas, which is the government legislation and the ease of doing business, basically. This is one. Of course, another thing that we've done is building confidence. We've built confidence over around 50 years since the inception of this country, the United Arab Emirates. It's almost 50 years now. And building confidence is not an easy thing. And investors are very smart. They always know and have a sense, on which countries, which cities are willing to take that extra step and give back to and stand in these difficult situations. Like, for example, last year during the pandemic, the most difficult times, talking about the tourism, just talking about the tourism and talking about Sharjah, there were 47 incentives given from the government of Sharjah, a list of 47 incentives across all the sectors, and the tourism got at least 4 or 5 of these benefits directly, just to help them maintain and survive these difficult times, and at the same time to enhance their cash flow during these difficult times. So governments normally, in such situations, the most difficult situations, it was difficult for the government and it was difficult for the private sector. It was a very, very strong collaboration and joint efforts. We put our hands with our private sector, our partners, because we work together. We don't work as a government and private sector. We work as one team. And that's really what makes it a successful business and attractive business environment. And this is a sustainable business environment as well. So the legislations, these are the services. Let's talk about the services, the intangible, I would say, services. And The tangible, of course, the tangible side would be the infrastructure, as I mentioned, and the airports and all the other tangible things that we see and experience, schools, healthcare, you name it. It's a whole ecosystem. If one element is missing, it makes it less attractive. Many people from around the world would like to come and live here in the UAE. We have more than 200 nationalities living in the United Arab Emirates. We have diversity across the 7 Emirates. Our country is not the biggest here in the region, but in terms of economy and size and ranking, I think we and Saudi Arabia, of course, we rank the highest amongst an international ratings in terms of safety and security, in terms of investments, in terms of the number of passengers through our airports, and so on. There is a very big list, and this is very important, and this gives us another competitive advantage to rely less on oil, and this is the key, to have a diversified economy, a well-diversified economy, relying less on oil and more on tourism and on other vital sectors.
Well, Dr. Ameenah, let me get you in here. Now, the problem is that when a tourist destination becomes popular and starts attracting a lot of tourists, it becomes a challenge to make that tourism industry sustainable. So according to you, how can destinations or such destinations overcome this growth paradox?
Thank you for this very interesting question, because this touches on a very raw nerve here in Mauritius. And this is one of the reasons why we have never privileged mass tourism. But nonetheless, as we are a very popular destination, I think the tourism sector can be a change for good and can be a vector through which we can address many of the sustainability issues. And as has been said by previous speakers, we have relied a great deal on the close collaboration between the private sector and the public sector to advance the sector. But I think as we move ahead and we would like to drive sustainability issues, and as I've said earlier on, we'd like to build we'll have to actually touch on the conscience of the people. I think we would like the tourists to be more demanding in terms of addressing sustainability. And I'll just quickly mention something. We depend a lot on seafood, and we know that ocean is becoming a very big issue now in terms of addressing sustainability. So I think the consumer has the potential to actually turn this round on its head by demanding more sustainable practices in the harvesting of fish, for example. I mean, these are some of the examples. Hotels here can become more tuned to regulation in the recycling of the waste. Not just waste, and also looking at food waste as well. So they can become a force for good, a force for change. And this is, I think, when we wake up, when we actually emerge from the COVID, we can reinvent this tourism sector in factoring in as well culture, because we are a very diverse population here. We can factor in culture, we can factor the biodiversity in making it a greener tourism, and we are a biodiversity hotspot. So we have a lot to offer to the tourist who is out there for a greener adventure, for a greener experience. So I think all these, when we bring them all together, can create a very powerful vector for which we can make a change and address at the same time the issue of sustainable practices.
Okay, so that's quite interesting, what some of the points you raised. Now, I've got another few minutes to go, so let me pick up on the last point, which I want all of you to give your thoughts on. Now, given that now we are in a recovery process and we are also looking at sustainability targets, keeping all that in mind, to unlock the potential of some of your projects which are being offered by various destinations, including the ones that you're heading, what are those the potential that each respective destination is offering, especially given in mind what we just discussed, that on one hand you're trying to get tourists back, but also you're looking at achieving sustainability, and also COVID-19 has changed this world. So let me go to Mr. Balawi. What is Saudi Arabia doing on that front?
Absolutely, and I think we must tie in this point specifically to the entire ecosystem. As I mentioned maybe previously on our G20 dossier that was signed off by the G20 countries, for the first time in G20 history, tourism was selected as a major working group within the G20 document that was signed off. And part of that was a commitment titled Al-Ula Framework for Inclusive Development, which is a commitment from all G20 countries, the leaders across the world, to look at tourism in a new sphere and encourage the local and inclusive development of local communities. And as I mentioned maybe previously, on my first interaction in this panel, the conversation around protecting communities, sustainability around the protection of environment must expand further so that we actually give back to these communities, give back to these destinations, whether that is ecology and environment, so whether it is actually physical, or indeed jobs, participation of the local communities and parts of that. Saudi Arabia has done a lot in the research side. If you look at the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology, leading in underwater research for the preservation of wildlife and indeed many of the living habitats in the water. But even in terms of implementation, when you look at the Red Sea project today, announcing the green credit loan that they will use to develop the state-of-the-art resorts across the Red Sea, making sure that that is done with one commitment, of course, in parallel with many other commitments, which is making sure that the environment is number one and the environment is always there. That will ensure that we have a sustainable destinations. We see best practice and we learn from we wouldn't say mistake of others, but from the experiences of others. If you look at in Australia and what's happening at the Great Barrier Reef, that is definitely something that we need to all learn from and ensure that we integrate into the solutions of tomorrow. So not only are we performing giga projects, but we're performing giga projects to basically leverage from the experiences of others. And not only are we protecting the environment, but we're actually giving back to ensure that the sustainability and success of this destination is something that is much, much more long-term.
And just a quick follow-up on that, just a short answer. I mean, does it make it challenging to attract investors then, the kind of potential you're offering them?
At the end of the day, the development of the physical assets within these destinations is what will ensure business continuity. So although in some eyes and maybe scratching the surface, this may seem that there is an additional costs in protecting whatever is there. At the end of the day, whatever is there is what makes the value of this asset. So ensuring that this business and this asset isn't in terms of the delivery, a 40 or 50-year project. This can be a 99-year project. This can be over a 100-year project, ensuring the success of that project. So for long-term committed investors that have a track record and credibility in this sector, they completely see the value of this.
Mr. Lavallo, let me get you in there. Abu Dhabi has also been doing a lot of stuff in terms of attracting investors and also tourists. So what's the strategy on that front, especially when you're talking about sustainability and then you're also talking about COVID-19?
Yeah, so Abu Dhabi and the Abu Dhabi Investment Office are really looking at supporting companies that have innovation at their core. And so when we think about what does innovation mean in tourism, we're looking at really from two ways. One is in terms of, are there any technological aspects within tourism that we can use our business ecosystem to have that be based in Abu Dhabi, whether it's impacting only Abu Dhabi or the wider region or the entire world. We'd like to have those types of technology companies located in Abu Dhabi. And then on the second type of innovation within tourism, we look at the tourism offering. So is it different locations within the Emirate of Abu Dhabi, especially around ecotourism? Again, that desert in our oases. In some of the farm, we have 25,000 farms in the UAE, and how can we give tourists access to that or to the coast? But also then different activities that people can be having, ways to experience the Emirate, ways to experience the country, whether it is more cultural aspects or new and innovative things. So we're looking at long-term desert camel treks, but also looking at artificial and augmented reality tourism aspects. So really kind of at any innovation that we can bring to the sector. And I think one thing that's very important that we're trying to do within the investment office is to not try and master plan economies. So we're not here to pick winners before they compete or to really put our stamp on any kind of types of innovation within tourism, but we're really asking the private sector, come to us with your ideas, bring the investment, and then we will catalyze it. We will make your investment go further, but we're not going to be the ones that dictate what it is. And really then leaving it up to the private sector, I think often leads to more of that sustainability, because you find that when left to their devices and maybe having the guidance of the public sector, but you will really have innovation that will come from new companies that will help sustainability in all the different types of ways that we can define it, in terms of ecologically, in terms of culturally and financially. So we're really excited to be welcoming new innovative companies to Abu Dhabi, looking for a lot of exciting ideas in tourism. And I think the next year or so is going to be a big year as we start welcoming more people and seeing tourism launch off again.
Mr. Al-Midfa, in this post-COVID era, what are the opportunities that the Middle East countries and destinations can capitalize on, especially when it comes to partnerships on investments with the private sector?
Thank you, Samir. Samir, I think maybe we discussed today, and my colleagues here, the panelists, discussed a few things that are really critical that will shape the future of this region, the Middle East. And maybe from our experience here in the United Arab Emirates, the way we were talking about diversity, and my colleague here from Abu Dhabi, Mr. Salvatore spoke about maybe the Abu Dhabi and what Abu Dhabi is offering in terms of a product as a destination. And you see, Dubai is very different. Sharjah is completely different. We're the cultural hub. We're known for the Arabian authentic destination, and with some archaeology and other things here in Sharjah that are unique to Sharjah. And then the other Emirates also have their unique aspects. And this is the nice thing that we witnessed here across the United Arab Emirates, where you can drive from the capital, from Abu Dhabi, across all the Emirates to Fujairah in like less than 3 hours, and experience most of what you would experience in many countries that you would need to travel maybe by air to see these different landscapes and different experiences. Now, the same example and scenario that we experienced here, we noticed in the beginning it was a competition, then it was a complementing aspect. And the complementing aspect is really what which created that boom in our economy. When we looked at it as a complementing aspect, not purely a competition. A healthy competition, the healthy level of competition is always required, but looking at how we complement each other and how are we different, and why is it good for us to be different? This is a very important thing. So we don't try to copy each other. We don't try to do the same thing again and again, because it becomes a weaker product for the whole country. And similarly now, as our colleague from Saudi Arabia, Mr. Hammad al-Balawi was talking, there are huge investments in Saudi Arabia, and we see this good for the region, and in particular maybe for the United Arab Emirates, because we have been building the economy and the well-diversified economy for 50 years. So I think this will be a very good, it's giving us a very good future insights for this part of the world here, especially the GCC and the Middle East. So we want more, here. We urge all the other countries as well to invest in infrastructure, in services, in legal, the legislation, constitution. Some, like for example, here now we in the United Arab Emirates, we had the golden visa, and then we had the other 100% ownership for businesses recently announced by Dubai and the Ministry of Economy, and all of these, and there is a big list of incentives and dynamic rules and regulations that will help investors, come and do their business, and whether they from any part of the world through the United Arab Emirates. And I think this is the future, and this is what we should capitalize on. And the government should always have a strong relation with the private sector and give them support them all the time, and make them as well part of the decision-making process. This is very important. Thank you, Samir.
Thank you. I'll give the last word to Dr. Ameenah. Now, Dr. Ameenah, you heard all those varied thoughts from different destinations, and we are still discussing as to how long will it take really for the industry, when I say industry, tourism industry, to recover from COVID-19. How do you see, or what do you see will be the playbook now for tourist destinations in terms of emerging from this challenging environment? And how is tourism really going to look like going ahead, especially bearing in mind that sustainability is also one of the key issues now on top of the agenda for most of these destinations? I'll give you the final word.
Thank you. I think at the center of all industries, we still have human people. And we have had great success with our tourism industry for the quality of the resources that we have put forward, especially the human capital. And if you ask anybody around the world, they will tell you that we are very famous for our smile. So I think we have to factor in people, we have to train them. And as we are talking here with all the panelists in terms of collaboration and cooperation, we've had, again, another 50 years, which resonate with all the panelists here, 50 years, almost 50 years of experience in the tourism industry. And I think over the years, we have built a human capital which can be easily exported. But instead of exporting, I think what we can do, we can see how we can collaborate. And we have very good airline with the UAE. We have good airline with Saudis. And I see that Saudis and UAE, they have investment potential. So I think this is the time when we can partner so that we can all emerge stronger from the COVID, and also factor in all the issues we have discussed so far so that this industry becomes a really sustainable industry, because by gum, for our economy, it matters so much. So thank you again for giving me the opportunity to make the case, at least for my country. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your thoughts. And I would like to thank all my panelists for sharing those insights. These are really interesting times for the industry. Of course, there's been a huge challenge for the tourism industry, but as they say, every challenge throws new opportunities, and some of those opportunities you just discussed with us. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And now I'll throw back to Rajan. That's me, Samir Hashmi, signing off from this panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Samir. Thank you, panel. Coming up, we have a presentation by Marcus Lee, the chairman of the Association of SME Business Owners in China, on China-Middle East cooperation in the travel and tourism sector post-COVID-19, a very important relationship. So do join us for that.